Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. The conversation started yesterday talking about the 65th Caribbean Meteorological Council that will be taking place from the 16th to the 17th of November. And today we continue. In studio, we have with us Dr. Jair Torres, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction Program Management Officer. Good morning, Dr. Torres, and welcome.
Good morning, Natasha. Thank you for inviting me to your show.
It's a pleasure to have you with us on the show this morning, and thanks so much for coming so early as well. I mean, jet lag is real, regardless of how short your flight may be. So let's talk a little bit about the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction's participation in this event that's taking place.
Okay, Natasha, but the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, as the name is saying, is the office of the United Nations that is trying to promote as much as possible the reduction of disaster risk. And this is following the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction that was approved in Japan in 2015, and that is in alignment with the whole 2030 agenda. So why we are partnering with the CMO, with the Caribbean Meteorological Organization, because they play a very important and regional role on promoting that every single country in the Caribbean has the capacities that are necessary to monitor, forecast, and observe different hydrometeorological hazards that will help people to better understand hydrometeorological hazards, but as well be prepared and take anticipatory actions when a hurricane, with a flood, with another hydrometeorological hazards will occur in any of the Caribbean countries.
Wonderful. And from what you just said there, at least let's say from your observation, having worked in this field, how would you say people's awareness is right now of disaster risk throughout the Caribbean region?
But the good thing is that in the Caribbean region, we have good institutions that has been working on really raising awareness. So we have the CDMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, but we have other ones like CMO and CMS that has been really working with communities, with governments in order to improve the awareness that people have about disaster risk. One of the big issues that we have on this is that sometimes we believe more on the be prepared to respond than to reduce really the risk of disasters. And this is one of the challenges that we are facing.
Oh, okay. And all right, so before we get into addressing those challenges, because of course it is something that we need to talk about, let's talk about some of the initiatives that the UNDRR has led in the Americas. Can you share a little bit about that and how it's improved disaster risk preparedness management?
Sure, we have already, for instance, last year, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, he launched an initiative that is called the Early Warning for All initiative. That initiative would like to promote that really every single person in air will be covered by early warning systems by 2027, in line with the Target G of the Sendai Framework. We have been selecting 4 countries in the Caribbean where we're going to start showing progress. Those are Haiti, Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, and Guyana. And this is where we're going to start really ensuring that all of the capacities of the countries are ready for better understanding the risk, better monitoring, observing, and forecasting, better dissemination of the warning, better response capabilities of individuals, communities, business, and institutions, but also better governance to allow that these early warning systems in the Caribbean stop being project-based and became a programmatic priority of governments in plans, regulations, and policies.
And it sounds like something that definitely is going to be effective and make a change. But just to note, how did you elect those 4 countries in particular? Was there any criteria that had to be fulfilled?
Well, to be honest, I was not a part of the selection of those countries, but it was a decision that was taken by the Secretary General. Notably, we will start with those countries, but the idea is to cover all of the countries of the world. So these are the initial countries that we will start working and making progress. We have been working already with Trinidad and Tobago. We have been already working with St. Kitts and Nevis. We have been working with St. Vincent and the Grenadines, other countries that hasn't been pre-selected as the first ones to initiate actions. But we will continue working with them in order to ensure that by 2027, all of the countries in the Caribbean will be covered with early warning systems.
Well, that's wonderful to see, because 2027 isn't that far off. So looking forward, and know that means that your work is definitely cut out for you and your team. Now, talking about initiatives and projects, let's learn a bit more about CRUISE, because we've been hearing about CRUISE. What exactly is it?
Well, the CRUISE is a financial mechanism that was launched in the framework of the COP15 in Paris. And that financing mechanism comes with the support of different donors, such as Belgium, France, Germany, Japan, the United States, Canada, and they would like to support small island development states and less development countries in order to bring the capacities for better early warning systems on those countries. So we have been working with crews in the Caribbean region. We did a project together with the World Bank and the World Meteorological Organization, on which one we have developed a roadmap for the Caribbean region on some priority actions that the region should focus in order to ensure that early warning systems are very effective.
Yes, and definitely are necessary. Now let's talk about the Caribbean in particular when it comes to disaster risk reduction. Would you say there are any challenges that are unique to our region?
Well, I will not say that are unique to the region, but you know, we are in a moment that we are competing with many challenges, climate change, reduction of poverty, violence, etc. And one of the issues is that we will need to do the shift of paradigm of thinking that disaster risk reduction is emergency response. If we really ensure that we reduce the risk of disasters, meaning that we reduce the vulnerability of people, that we reduce the vulnerability of assets, that we reduce our exposure to that hazards, we will not need to be so much prepared to respond, as we are reducing the real risk that we are facing. And nowadays we have the technology, we have our governance mechanisms that allow us to really to take anticipatory action and really diminish the possibility to have, you know, damage and losses.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Now, so we have this council coming up. You've shared some initiatives that are coming up as well, but what else would you say are some strategic priorities on the table for the UNDRR in the next few years?
Well, priorities that are important, we have a roadmap that is the Sendai framework for the RR. They have 7 specific targets, 4 specific priorities. So our commitment is to ensure that every single country really fulfill those priorities and those targets by 2030. So some of them are really the reduction of casualties and losses, really the reduction of losses in the economy, the reductions of mortality, increased cooperation for disaster risk reduction, increased multi-hazard early warning systems. So this is where we're going to focus on these aspects. And all of this, linking it with the climate crisis that we are facing and on which one the Council of the Meteorological Council will be discussing about how to better adapt for climate change and for the challenge that we are living, and also in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals. How with the existing or the real reduction of disaster risk, we will contribute to ensure that countries are developing in a sustainable and resilient way.
Wonderful. Now, you just mentioned, of course, the council that's coming up next week and speaking about some of that focus on climate change. Is there anything else in particular that your office is going to be focusing on during your council?
But during that council, we're going to be presenting a study that we have developed. It's a study of how different countries in the Caribbean have really ensured the coherence between the different agendas. So how, in terms of conceptual climate change adaptations, disaster risk reduction, and sustainable development has been integrated in the concept of resilience, how operational is this going, how institutional is going, financial is going, because sometimes we see that we have different frameworks, and what happened in some of the cases is countries try to work on silos instead of working together in implementing these strategic frameworks that we have selected in the 2030 agenda. So we will be discussing about this specific study, mentioning the role that meteorological agencies and regional institutions like the Caribbean Meteorological Organizations can take on ensuring that coherence and promoting coherence with other major agendas.
It's wonderful to see that that's the approach that's being taken, because we do see many times, just in general throughout life, that there's a lot of operation that takes place in silos. So seeing that there are some deadlines that need to be met, 2027, 2030, and now this is being approached after a study, we look forward to seeing effective change taking place. Now, we've spoken at a very a high level, let's say a strategic level, a policy level, but what about for those who are just on the ground, who need to do their part for the reduction in disaster risk? What can we do?
Well, this is a very interesting question. I think that one of the things that we have been promoting with other UN agencies like UNICEF and UNESCO is really to work, for instance, with kids, with the students that are really promoters of change kids. Whatever we ask adults to do, for instance, like prepare emergency kits, we normally don't do. But if you have your kid from the school that say like, hey mom, hey dad, in the school they told me that we need to prepare an emergency kit, they are really a promoters of change, and you are doing. So working really with communities and really working with schools in order to promote this change of mentality to them. So what communities need to do? The first is to try to understand what are the hazards that they are exposed to. Sometimes we don't really understand why things are changing, like the weather is like that, and we need to try to understand what are the context that we are living. Second, as individuals, we have contribution to do. We really need to check in our communities how we can reduce the potentiality that those hazards trigger disasters, by better protecting the canalization of water, by better organizing, the garbage, by better talking with our community about who will need help in the case of a specific emergency, and be prepared from home as an individual, as a family, and then as a community.
Wow, definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Torres, and thank you for being with us this morning on the show. Looking forward to seeing you back with us soon at some point. Hopefully by 2027, 2050, we can get an update.
I hope even early. Thank you so much for the invitation, Natasha.
It's our pleasure. That's Dr. Jair Torres from the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And we are the Now Morning Show. We'll be back with you in a few moments. Stay tuned. Arms of a stranger, you're full of magic, don't waste it. Touch my heart and